Hello, everyone. My name is Xander, and I am a senior undergrad student at the University of Iowa. And I wanted to try something to kind of help other students as a student. This is, for example, I just took the general microbiology course at Iowa with Dr. Regina McGrain and Jana Radin. And I wanted to kind of explain through the lens of a student that gets straight A's, and in this course I got an A+, which was awesome, about how to approach learning in a way that you might have not seen before. This page obviously looks pretty overwhelming. This is actually kind of a less busy page than usual, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, but I kind of wanted to just go through like an example for this micro class on how I learn and how I approach studying and what lets me get these very high grades in my classes versus the typical flashcard making that people do, which I do that as a subset, but not for my actual learning. So the way I do this is I take my learning objectives, because they're very focused on that, and I will put that in a thicker kind of font or a bigger font or thickness of pen. So we see label key parts of virus. I have key parts. Just virus in general is kind of the main concept. This is an intro to viruses. The composition of viruses, and all of the structures are in that learning objective, like nucleic acid, capsid, spikes, envelopes, origin of viruses. So all of those learning objectives I put, before I even go to lecture, I will write these down in the bolded kind of words and just put them on a page. And then I'll go through each slide at a time that's going to be for that lecture I have, and I'll kind of write down any other titles of slides that seem relevant. So like I wrote down hosts for viruses, because that was like the name of a title slide. Are viruses alive? These are not as like important things, but I still write it down because I like to kind of get everything in there. And these are also kind of some extra slide stuff as well. So after I kind of prime and write all of this kind of stuff down, and also like extra titles, I'll go to class, kind of take any notes that I can during class, annotating on my slides, and having an iPad is very useful. So I'll, for example, she'll talk about a concept, and then I will, let's say we're talking about neuraminidase, the enzyme. It's pretty much involved in cleaving off this virus off the host cell to allow it to kind of replicate more and do its infection stuff. So kind of doing that in lecture, and then after lecture I will go through all the slides again and see how I can kind of connect these concepts, or at least think about them. So, for example, label the key parts of a virus. I'll put often in red and yellow highlighter, like the kind of description or like an important aspect from that slide. That's like kind of the start, or like a definition or whatnot. So let's say like this one is host range is a spectrum of host cells that a pathogen can infect. So I highly recommend using colors to your advantage. That's a huge thing for me. You don't have to make it like extremely pretty, but using different colors for different reasons are very important and help you retain things a lot better. For example, purple, for some reason when I took biochem, purple became like my color for proteins and enzymes. So anytime I really have purple, it's a protein or enzyme in my head, and that just helps me kind of remember when I'm writing it down. See, I have it here as well. Blue, often like regular dark blue. I typically would use that for like big concept stuff. Sometimes I kind of sprinkle it in with stuff where it just kind of makes sense in my head. You just kind of have to find colors that make sense. I started using dark blue instead of black to like have a description for things because my brain likes color, and so just writing in straight black ink or whatever color is not super ideal in my head all the time. For example, this was the 3 hypotheses for the origin of viruses, and I put them all in red here. It's very bold, and you can kind of see it clearly. And then, like, for the basic structure, you want to always try to make things easy to connect in your head. So obviously this is kind of a common sense example, but with viral nucleic acids and capsids, we know that that makes a nucleocapsid. So I kind of drew arrows just to kind of show how it combines in my slides or in my notes, so I don't forget that aspect. And the best way I would say to learn a lot of concepts is comparing. So like naked capsid virus versus envelope virus. So like explaining the characteristics and whatnot, and then like the mechanisms of their transmission. If you can abbreviate words and terms as much as possible and still like know what you're talking about, it makes things a lot easier too in your notes. So for example, instead of saying like antibodies like this, I'll do just AB like that. Or instead of antibiotics, I'll just write ABX. So because sometimes I do search up like the actual abbreviations, and then if it makes sense intuitively, I will write that down. I also took cardiovascular physiology, so like for anything with like, let's say we had myocardium, I would do something like myo, and then I put a heart because I'm lazy, and like that's how I would say myocardium for me in my notes. Or if we have like heart failure, I just do HF. So making your notes kind of easy for you to understand is the best way, because when I show this to people, they're like, what even is this? Which I kind of agree, this is kind of a lot to look at without context. And to be fair, this is not even like that much compared to my other kind of pages that I have. I chose this one because it's actually kind of simpler. But here's another example of an importance of studying viruses. So this is kind of like a learning objective. And then I have big arrows, which are like leading to the bigger concept stuff that were kind of talked about. And then within those bigger concepts, there's kind of smaller details. And so pretty much seeing how things are relevant in your head and how things are connected is like one of the most important things you can do with learning. And actually taking the time to go through it and try to understand like why. Like sometimes I feel like I'm almost feeling dumb when I'm learning, or like I don't know what's going on, but that's actually like a process of deep learning, which is being like, okay, so this is related to this, which is, related to this or whatever. But over time you can learn like, okay, maybe this is not related to this. Like you were actually wrong originally, and fixing it to be related to this and whatever. Pretty much like adjusting and learning and changing how you understand things is what helps you learn and retain it. So like, for example, I have Anki questions here, right? These are flashcard questions I will make when I go along with this as well. I don't look at this material until like a few days before the test again, and I will retain like 80 to 90% of each of these pages when I start studying again, like without really having a ton of mental effort, because the process of encoding this and like retaining it this way, it just makes it so much easier to remember later. Like when I get to tests, I mean, I'm just kind of trying to like dive into the nitty gritties and make sure I remember that, and like all the memorizing kind of aspects, because like this stuff has become like so intuitive to the point like I don't need to memorize the basic structure of a virus is vironucleic acid, a capsid, spikes, whatever. Spikes are not really in all of them, but it's all like, it becomes much more intuitive if you actually learn it properly. Plus, when you get to a final exam, I didn't really study any old material. I just kind of went through the old tests very briefly, and I retained all of it on the final exam. And that is the one key to doing this kind of lengthy process, is initially very dense and lengthy, but when you get to like tests or final exams, you retain this stuff long term, and it's honestly, I would say, much more useful for when you get to like medical school or whatever, because you want to be able to retain what you know so that you can apply it. And I have just been finding a lot of success with this stuff. My stuff used to be very different. This is not like a very quick process. For example, let me find one of my old classes. I used to be very messy with kind of how I do this. Actually, these are like not too bad. But it was pretty rough. Let me see if I can find earlier ones. It was pretty rough in the beginning when I was trying out this new process of learning. Let me see. I think it gets kind of ugly up here. Yeah. So this is how I started doing these, right? And it would look like this. Like, yeah, you can already see, like, yes, it kind of looks pretty because everything's boxed, but this was not, like, an efficient way to do things, because, like, you can't really tell what's, like, the big concepts and how things are connected. I mean, granted, some of this is kind of just memorizing, but a lot of this is just you can just tell it doesn't look right. Like, yes, it kind of looks pretty with the colors, but the way I was doing this before, like, even this, like, what is this, This is how I started doing this 2 years ago, my sophomore year, and now I'm a senior. So we have whatever this is to kind of, this is much, in my opinion, cleaner. Even this, it's just much more organized, and each of these pages is an entire, okay, this one's kind of ugly, to be honest, because there was a lot going on, and I was trying to, like, understand it in the page, but this has been a process, and if you really want to do well in your classes, you have to learn how to kind of have that ugly way of doing things like I was before, and realizing, like, over time how to kind of get better at it. And I highly recommend watching a YouTuber named Justin Sung. He's a learning coach, and he is who I've been watching tons of videos about on how to learn and thinking about learning, like metacognition and whatnot. And it's honestly, I mean, I've gotten 1 A-, and that was in physics, because I honestly was kind of lazy in that class, which is kind of a bad excuse, but every other class has been an A or an A+ at the University of Iowa that I've taken, and I've done this kind of way of learning for pretty much every class. I mean, even anatomy, which I really didn't use flashcards when I took that class with Ray Fagenbaum. It's a 5-hour credit class, and let me see. I feel like I'm missing it point blank. Let's see. I'm definitely missing, yeah. Okay. Well, see, even then, this was, like, pretty messy too, right? But this is what I was doing for my anatomy chapters, right? And just the process of spending this much time kind of trying to understand it and write it down and get it on one page, I retained this extremely well. When I got to finals for anatomy, I did not even have time to study for the old material because I spent so much time doing this stuff, and I ended up getting one wrong on the final. So I got a 74 out of 75 or whatever the grade cutoff was, which in my head is kind of like insane, right? So honestly, if you're looking to do well in school, that is my advice. If you want any other questions, let me know. I'm open to explaining any thought process or how to do well in any of the classes I've done at the University of Iowa. I've taken abnormal psych, the anatomy class, biochem, college physics 1 and 2, diversity of form and function, human phys, Orgo 1 I really have not done in a while, so I probably can't help with that much. PChem 2, and then general micro, cardio phys, skeletal muscle phys, human genetics, and disease. Those are all the ones I kind of have on here. So if anyone ever needs help with that, let me know, and I'm totally willing to help.